racism wouldn't be the problem it is if, and I'm speaking from the US, and I'll just use the term white people, if white people did not have racist assumptions that they then use to kind of influence their behavior in mistreating members of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities.
This is Chocolate and Coffee Break, a compassionate proposition, a space to share stories, bridge divides, and spark meaningful connections. So grab your chocolate, pour your cuppa, and let's break down barriers, one conversation at a time. And now, here's your host, Andrea Pudding.
Welcome to another episode of the Chocolate and Coffee Break. I hope you've got your chocolate and a cuppa and ready to listen and learn a little more. So today's Chocolate and Coffee Break invites us into a conversation that's not always easy, but always necessary. We're joined by Dr. Amanda Udis-Kessler, sociologist, ethicist, and anti-racism trainer, who helps us to uncover how everyday culture sustains inequality and what we can do to dismantle it. So we're really looking forward to talking to Amanda. So welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming along. So I'd like to start the show with a conversation starter. So today, my question for you is what's a belief you've had to unlearn in order to grow?
I have had to unlearn the belief that I was done growing and that I was who I am and that I could no longer change and learn. It sounds simple and almost silly, but I think we can't grow unless we believe we can grow. And recent events in my life have forced me to recognize that I can grow and am growing and will continue to grow.
That's really awesome, because we do. If we think we can't grow anymore, then we do stop. And we always want to keep growing and learning. And hopefully that's what we're going to do today as well. I think we'll grow a little bit from talking to you, and we're going to learn an awful lot. So Amanda, you wrote a book, Cultural Processes of Inequality, and I have spent the last few days reading it, and it's amazing that what it opened up in me was just incredible, because while I keep talking about inequality and the importance of connecting with people, I hadn't gone into the how and the why that happens. So I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about that today. So can you explain how culture creates inequality, not just reflects it?
Absolutely. And what I'd like to do is actually start with the definition of culture that I developed for the book, because it's a little different from how we commonly use culture. Often when we talk about culture, we're thinking of the arts or something like that. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by culture is basically shared understandings and meaning systems. So the ideas, beliefs, and values that people hold in common, the assumptions that underlie those, and then the norms and rules and laws that emerge from those shared understandings. So really, culture is how we make sense of the world. It's how we make meaning. It's how we put ourselves into a story or make sense of the story we find ourselves in. And in that sense, really everything we do has a cultural component, because human beings are meaning-making creatures. So unfortunately, we are also very good at making meaning when it comes to any form of inequality, racism, sexism, or any other sort.
And that was, I find with culture, it's looking at that. We tend to gravitate towards people who think and believe like we do, and that becomes our culture of understanding of the way we work. So rather than saying, well, all people in a certain demographic belong to this culture, the truth is that they can be like chalk and cheese. So for an example, if you think about the Christian religion, the culture of one denomination can be vastly different to what somebody else's is. So we can look at that as saying, well, Christian culture, it doesn't exist as one, as an example.
Well,
So
and indeed, there are subcultures of all sorts. Different groups do have different cultural understandings. What's helpful when we're thinking about inequality, though, is to think about cultural understandings that are broadly shared in a society, especially among members of a more powerful or socially valued group. So racism wouldn't be the problem it is if, and I'm speaking from the US, and I'll just use the term white people, if white people did not have racist assumptions that they then use to kind of influence their behavior in mistreating members of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities.
yeah. And that's what I found incredible reading your book, is to look at those different aspects. So, for example, who matters? And who matters?
Yeah, that's a very simple question that we don't ask often enough. But if someone is new to thinking about systemic inequality of any sort at all, or they think in very individualistic terms and don't really think about people having different life experiences because of groups that they belong to, social groups, gender, racial, whatever, looking at who gets treated well, who has access to good things, who has higher social status. All of that makes it pretty clear that unfortunately some people matter more than others, which should not be the case.
Yeah. And one of the questions you posed that really made me stop and think, and one that I'm going to really reflect on, is how do I benefit from racism, from whatever, all of the different isms? How do I benefit from that? Because I have never really been the victim of any of them. Maybe sexism a little bit. Maybe I'm getting into the ageism, but I have had a life free from all of those things. So how can we look at that in a deeper, in another way to open our eyes?
So we tend not to notice the ways that we benefit from inequality if we are in a social group that benefits, because our lives just are what they are and we take a lot of things for granted. In my case, what helped me begin to recognize the ways I benefit from racism came when I was already quite an activist around sexuality related issues. And so I was very clear about ways that, say, homophobia hurt me. And then I was in college and at one point went to some sort of lecture on racism. And as I was listening to the lecture, I thought, this actually sounds really similar. Racism, in some ways, sounds kind of similar to homophobia in that the details are really, really different, but some of the ways it works seem to be similar. And since I'm aware of how I suffer from homophobia, at that moment I realized, oh my gosh, I had better learn how I benefit from racism. If I want my heterosexual friends to be good allies to me on matters of sexuality, I'd better learn how to be a good ally to people of color, BIPOC people. I'm not sure what different terms are used these days, but those are the common ones. And so I began looking at some of the privilege lists that people have developed. A very famous white privilege list was developed by a woman named Peggy McIntosh, a psychology professor in the US. Her list has gotten around the world quite a bit. And she wrote down over a number of years all the ways that she realized she benefited from racism. And what's astonishing is in the essay that came out of this project, she noted that she kept forgetting about all of these benefits until she wrote them down and kept looking at the list. So we don't notice the ways we benefit. We're just living our lives, but we tend to notice the ways we suffer. So we need to be creative in understanding the suffering and then kind of translating that and asking, well, are there ways that I benefit? And again, I could rattle off a long list of white privileges if we wanted to do that. I don't know that we do.
Well, I looked at that list in your book, and it was so long. It was just overwhelmed me to think that, yeah, I've really got to stop and think about this, because there is so much more that we don't think about. And I know in the book you talk about this kind of ways things change and the way people look at that. And we're going to explore more about that after we've had a quick break and so I can have a nibble on my chocolate and listen to these great people who support the show.
When I hit perimenopause, all I heard was doom and decline, until I took a sacred pause and I went searching for women who are radiant after menopause, like Dr. Christiane Northrup, Dr. Vandana Shiva, and the late Dr. Gladys McGarry, still shining at 103. In this book, I share their stories and wisdom and the magic that menopause truly holds. 7 Wonders of Menopause is a sacred reminder. You're not ending, you're returning. Available at independent bookshops in Australia and Amazon around the world.
Did you know that only 30% of speakers are women and that only 13% of panels feature women? In order to change that, there is now a directory at womenspeakers.com.au where you can go and search for a speaker. We also have groups on Facebook and LinkedIn under the name Australian Women Speakers, where you can just go and post about your event and women will respond.
Amanda, there was this one sentence that you wrote in your book that really hit hard on me, that I just kind of highlighted. I've got to this one is important. We tend to have compassion for the person who had a problem while judging the person who is the problem. And as someone who talks about compassion all the time, that really hit me, because do I have compassion? Do we have compassion for everybody, or do we selectively choose it? So I'd like to talk about that thing, that who is the problem or who has the problem. How does that work in what we're talking about?
So one really good example of that issue has to do, and again, I'm afraid I can mostly talk about the United States of America. It's simply the examples I know best. Has to do with how large-scale drug problems have been seen in our country. And so, since we're focusing largely on race today, one thing we learned during the crack cocaine epidemic in the 1980s and 1990s was that the federal government defined crack users as being problems. People like Hillary Clinton, in fact, used the term super predator to describe Black and Hispanic crack cocaine drug addicts. Now, in fact, crack cocaine was used by more white people than people of color, but most people in this country don't know that because the media selectively covered it, and it painted people of color who used crack as exceptionally dangerous, as exceptionally amoral in profound ways. And so between 3/4 and 4/5 of the federal funding to address that epidemic went to criminal justice, so arresting and locking up drug users and drug sellers and so on. And only between a 1/5 and a 1/4 went to preventative measures and to healthcare to help people recover. If we then fast forward to the opioid epidemic, much more recently, and in fact still going on in the US, that has widely been described as a white epidemic, especially engaging people in more rural areas. Now, it's not that that's necessarily the whole truth, but that is the image that we've gotten from the media coverage. And so, interestingly, the federal government, when trying to figure out what to do about the opioid epidemic, swapped its percentages and literally put approximately 3/4 to 4/5 of its funding toward preventative care and healthcare and recovery options for people who were addicted. So in the 80s and 90s in the US, Black and Hispanic crack cocaine addicts were seen as the problem. They were seen as dangerous and destructive and as needing to be contained and arrested and jailed and so on. These days, the mostly white opioid addicts, and again, it's more complex than that, but the media presents it as a white problem, and white opioid addicts are largely supported with federal money to try to recover. I can't think of a better example than that, though I have other examples if we want them.
Yeah, so money is put in to help the people that who have a problem. They have a problem. They're addicted. So they've had all these things happen in their life, and that's the problem. Whereas people of a different race or a different group are considered to be the problem. It's just because they are, example, Black or Hispanic, that this happens. So all of the people who are Black and Hispanic are now labelled as that.
And it's not really surprising that that happened, because it was already the case in the US that Black and Hispanic people were defined as more problematic than white people, are understood or assumed by white people, I should say, to be more dangerous, to be less moral, to be less competent, and so on. So that particular example involving drugs is just one really concrete example of how a whole set of much more basic assumptions about competence and morality and dangerousness and so on wind up getting, say, racialized.
Yeah. I'd love for you to share any one of the stories from the book where you notice the difference between a white person treatment and, say, a Black person's treatment.
Well, I'll give you my favorite example. So I am an inveterate speeder. I have just about never driven as an adult without speeding at least once. I moved to Colorado Springs in 2003, and I think I've racked up more than 25,000 occasions of speeding since then, but I've lost count. And in all of that time, I have gotten exactly one speeding ticket. I got it very soon after moving here, and I was going more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. And I didn't know it was a speed trap. I just moved here. The police officer pulled me over. He was extremely friendly and polite. He could see I was nervous. He was kind. He gave me the required ticket and said, "Drive safe now," and left. And he clearly was not at all worried. He didn't search my car to see whether I might have any contraband in it. He did not ascribe my speeding to my being drunk or on drugs or anything like that. He simply saw a white woman in a white woman car, and he kind of had to pull me over because I was going at least 10 miles over the limit on a residential street that was narrow. I mean, there's no excuse. I have not gotten pulled over once since then. And if we look at the statistics about who police pull over for speeding infractions, for minor auto infractions like having a broken taillight, but even for no reason at all because they just have a feeling about them, overwhelmingly, people of color are pulled over and white people are not. Now, what's so interesting is from the studies that have been able to determine this, it turns out that white people are more likely, not less likely, more likely to have contraband in their cars in the US, more likely to have illicit money or guns or drugs or something like that. But because the police rarely pull white people over, they don't learn this. So they never get to challenge their own assumption that the drug runners and gun runners are all, Black and Hispanic people. And so they pull over a lot of Black and Hispanic people. Most of them, they don't find any contraband, but occasionally they do. But they would find more if they pulled white people over. So there's this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, or this kind of cycle where they start with an assumption about who's got the bad stuff in the car. They pull over the people they think have it. They find it sometimes, not often. They miss all the people who have it, who they don't pull over. So they never get to sort of reset their expectations, and people of color continue to get pulled over way disproportionate to their numbers in the society.
Yes, and one of the stories that really also hit me, I mean, I'm really thinking about, and like I'm thinking about all the stories you have in there in the book. But one of the stories about the little 11-year-old boy playing in the park with a toy gun and who was shot. I mean, that was just To think about that, that's just horrific. That the assumption was because he's black, that's not a toy.
Right. So his name was Tamir Rice, and there are several things about that particular story that are totally heartbreaking. Um, One of them is that the police dispatcher, so whoever called this into the police, the dispatcher asked that person twice whether the little boy playing with a gun was black or white. We know this. There's records that show that that happened. And the dispatcher only decided to send a police car once the person calling it in had confirmed twice that the child was black. So had Tamir Rice been a little white boy, there wouldn't have been a police car, there wouldn't have been a shooting, there wouldn't have been a death. The other thing we know is that the officer who shot him fired within 2 seconds of arriving on the scene. We have that documented. We also know that that police officer had lost a prior job over competence issues and lied about having lost the job in order to get the job with the Cleveland police force, and was eventually fired from the Cleveland police force. So everything about the story is tragic and wrong, and it just shows the sort of the bad faith that that some white people bring to seeing someone with darker skin than theirs. And while the gun wasn't exactly a toy, it did not fire a bullet that could seriously injure or kill anyone. So it was functionally harmless.
Yeah, a tragic story. And let's just have another quick break while we think about that. And we'll come back in a minute with more from Amanda.
Hello, I'm Annie Burke, Cosmic Heart Intuitive. I'm the animal-human relationship enricher. I help animal parents connect with their animals, living or in spirit, through telepathic conversations. And you too can learn how to connect with your animal telepathically with my mentorship program. It's just amazing what you can learn from your animals about their past lives, their current life, and their future lives. It will change your life, it will change their life.
You've ticked the boxes: career, commitments, calendar that's more packed than your pantry, but something's still missing. In Compassionate Purpose, Andrea Putting invites you to stop chasing busy and start living with intention. This book is about real fulfillment through small acts of compassion, purpose-driven service, and meaning that last. No pressure, no perfection, just purpose with heart. Compassionate Purpose, Discovering a Life of Fulfillment. Search for Andrea Putting on Amazon.
I'm back with Amanda, and I have a really important question. I know that here we are, two white women having this conversation. So I'd love to know what it is that us white people, those of us who have all the white privileges, what is it that we can do to help address this problem? I know sitting down with a chocolate and coffee with somebody is a good start, but what is it that we can do?
So there are actually a number of things we can do. And I think the one that generally comes kind of first in time is self-education about racism in the context of one's own country usually. So what you read or watch or listen to in terms of podcasts might be different from what I read or watch or listen to. But there are incredible numbers of resources out there, often written by members of devalued communities of color, but sometimes written by white allies, that tell us about the history and the current practices of these forms of inequality. I mean, my book is a little modest contribution to that, I think. So the self-education piece, I generally think comes first, because most of us, to the extent that we're willing to be uncomfortable, we usually start being uncomfortable by learning new things and wrestling intellectually. Then we start looking at our own lives. We start looking at our own assumptions. We start looking at our own behaviors and practices. I can actually give a really concrete example. I, not that long ago, was in a cab with a Black driver, and I watched my thought process and realized it had some unfortunate and inappropriate assumptions in it. Now, I did not say or do anything inappropriate at all, but I just watched my thinking and went, I have been doing anti-racism training for years. I've been a sociologist for decades, and this stuff is still in my head because it was drilled into me when I was little. So once we have an understanding of how society works, we start looking at how we work, how our thought processes work. We start looking at our own emotions around these things. Am I more nervous if I'm around someone from a community of color, for example? And if so, why am I more nervous? What assumptions are driving that? That is where the work really starts to get uncomfortable. Once we start getting uncomfortable, then we learn to get comfortable with our discomfort. So our initial impulse with discomfort of any sort for any reason is generally to flee it or push it away or not really engage with it. Discomfort is our lizard brain's way of telling us we're in danger. And unfortunately, our lizard brain or amygdala cannot differentiate between actual and perceived danger. So yes, if someone were chasing me down the street with a gun or knife, it really would be fine for me to be uncomfortable and run away screaming. However, being uncomfortable around someone because of my assumptions about their race has nothing to do with any actual danger. So I then have to start sitting with my discomfort and being with my discomfort. I actually do white discomfort training with white people to help them learn how to do this. And there are any numbers of practices we can do to get comfortable with our discomfort. Once we've done that piece, then we start asking, okay, how can I be part of the solution? I've learned a number of things. I have some idea how this works. I am willing to be uncomfortable. I am willing to be quiet and learn and listen. Now what? And so then we might volunteer with organizations. We might donate money. We might teach other people about some of the things we've learned. We might show up at protests. There are so many things we can do. And that will have to do with the immediate needs in our area, the particular concerns we have. So if police violence is more of a concern to me than, say, homelessness, my money or energy or efforts might go toward fighting police violence rather than toward addressing homelessness. But we all get to pick what moves us the most or what brings us the most pain and kind of go there. And as we do those things, what'll happen is when we're engaged with these communities, supporting them, listening to them, following their lead on actions to take, we will continue to learn and grow. We will continue to be more uncomfortable. And so there's kind of a growth cycle, which in my mind is the reverse of the sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of harm that we've seen so much of. So there's a great deal we can do. The last chapter of my book actually does talk about some ways we can address the cultural pieces of this in ourselves and how we can think differently.
Yeah. All very, very important things for us to look at and think about. And that's one thing that with the chocolate and coffee is that it helps people to have that comfortable setting where they can sit and talk to somebody and get to know them. So hopefully I'm doing my little bit to help with this because there was a study that showed that if you sit with somebody for just 1 hour and listen to them, that those differences can all melt away. So for us to be aware of our unconscious bias, to become somehow aware, can really help us to be on that pathway and sit with chocolate and coffee and follow your advice. And I think we will have a better world. So Amanda, I'd love to share with everyone where they can get your book and what they can learn from you and how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. So I have a website specifically for my writing, which is https://AmandaUdis-Kessler.com. So it literally is just my name with no space and without the dash. So AmandaUdis-Kessler.com. Information about all of my books is on there. This is only one of several books I've written. And if people would like to get in direct contact with me to talk about any of these matters, I completely welcome emails. My email address is amanda@amandaudiskessler.com.
Thank you, Amanda. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show. And I'd like to encourage everyone to find someone who is different to them, who is from a different culture. Sit down with them, share a chocolate and coffee, and share with us all about your experience on our Facebook group. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on the show. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. And until then, let love be the loudest voice.